Hey guys, how we doing? Monday content, and we got a special interview today with Ben Davies, Worcester. What's your title?
Head of Science and
Head
Medicine.
of Science and Medicine. So we're very honoured for him to join us. So thanks very much, Davo.
Pleasure.
Good. Right, let's crack into it. So, how long now have you been physioing?
So I've been physio for, I reckon, 13 years now.
13 years.
Yeah.
And so you've been in Worcester 9 or 10,
Yep.
and you were with Aston Villa as well.
Yeah, so I did Aston Villa Academy for about 3 years, which was brilliant. And then actually was lucky enough to do 6 months sort of summers with Worcester.
Yeah.
And then like a 6 month winter with football, which was real nice.
So what are the because you obviously did with the younger lads at Aston Villa, and we talk a lot about how we can help the youngsters because they're the ones that are coming through and breaking. What were some of the things you saw, maybe common injuries with the young footballers as compared with the common injuries of young cricketers?
So young footballers would be more acute injuries, I would say, than young cricketers who get like a chronic overuse injury, even at a young age. So young footballers, you get things like sprained ankles, Osgood slatters, calf tears, hamstring tears, quad tears, a lot of lower limb stuff and acute injuries in football. Whereas obviously young cricketers, the ones we see, you're getting things like lumbar stress fractures or rotator cuff impingement, things that are slightly more of an overuse injury. So I'd just say probably a little difference between acute injuries in football with youngsters and those overuse chronic injuries in cricket. I'd say the big difference is.
Okay, that's interesting. So a lot of muscle tears, obviously the dynamic nature of the sport is where, I mean, what would you say as well? You've seen how I train the boys now for the last 9, 10 years. How are the big differences in the trainings that we do with our lads compared with what goes on in football?
I think football, they tend to train their players more as sort of medium interval runners. So, like a 2K runner or a 800 metre runner. That's how they tend to train their players. And actually, I don't think they'd be as specific as probably you go with our young players in cricket. They wouldn't do specific trunk exercises, specific lower limb, upper limb, or they wouldn't be doing things like correctives and primals and things like that. They'd be doing more generic sessions and proprioception sessions. So I'd just say they're probably not as specific as cricket at the minute with academy level, definitely.
Okay, I think we might be a little bit different as well with our academy because of those things we're doing. Remember, you've got the correctives, you've got the primals, so make sure you're putting them into place. So let's talk about the young cricketers because with the cricket, obviously the academy and the pathways have all filtered through to you a lot. And over the winter, you see a lot of youngsters. And let's get into the common things we see. So the big one we always talk about, the one that I know I keep going on to you guys, and I see it Davo a lot about, is I want to try and eliminate stress fractures. So how many do you see in youngsters?
Well, if we go, let's take our last 4 years at Worcester, academy players, I reckon we've seen 16 stress fractures.
Yeah.
Just in the academy.
And the worrying trend is that these guys are not having a high bowling workload. And the even more worrying thing is about 80% of them haven't been fast bowlers. So that's the thing that we're like thinking, Jesus, what is going on here?
Yeah. So obviously starting to see a lot more spinners of a young age get stress fractures. We've had 2 or 3 of those in the last 12 months, I think. So it's a worry because before we were trying to tackle the problem of just fast bowlers with stress fractures, it seems that spinners are starting to get them now.
Yeah, and what we're seeing really and we're thinking about is the fact that everything's always pushed towards workload with bowlers, and the fact that they're thinking if the workload's too high, we're getting stress fractures, but we're taking that out of the equation and they're still getting them. So I know with some of the youngsters that go to the private schools, we're seeing a pattern of them playing rackets. So if they're playing rackets a few times a week, and the positions they get in with that lateral flexion, and even if they're not bowling, we're still getting stress fractures with them.
Well, I think if you take a perfect example of someone who'd be on our academy, they'd have a really good conditioning program from you. They'd have all their primals and correctives, which work well for them. But ultimately, we can't control if they play 3 or 4 sports a week, 3 or 4 gym sessions a week, across 7 days, where they actually have no break. We can't control that, and that's probably the breaking point, where they're going for 7 days a week, exercising something different or a different sport every other day, sometimes 2 times a day, and that's actually where they're getting cumulative load is too high. They'll break down.
Yeah, I mean, we there was a youngster we had a couple of years ago, and he came in and he had the stress fracture, and I think about a month after he came in, and we started talking to him about what else he was doing at school, and the cricket he was doing as well, and it turned out he bowled something like 60 overs 2 weeks before he got the stress fracture, and it's just like, wow. So it's one of the big things. I did a video for you last week on workloads and how Davies got this Excel spreadsheet, and we plot in every week what's going on with the bowling loads, and it shows us if they go above, is it 10 to 15%?
Yeah. And
then it flags it up or below it. So remember, going below is sometimes just as bad as going above it. But we've got the kids on the academy who, particularly the spinners who in the past have always been fine, suddenly bowling the high volume and numbers of overs, doing these different sports like rackets, and trying to study at the same time, probably been sat horrendous positions, and it's all going peak tong. That's why we're getting so many stress fractures in young bowlers. We're like, what is going on here? Plus, some of the conditioning programs that they're doing with their schools, it's quite horrendous. We're sat there at Malvern sometimes in the winter and we're watching stuff go on. I remember we looked at each other this winter when this young girl was probably about 15. She was in the gym, and then she came out into the hall and she was doing single leg lateral hops, and she could not land and stabilize. And then when we saw what she was doing in the gym, she was doing heavy deadlifts. We're thinking, this poor girl cannot land and be stable on one leg, but they're doing deadlifts. And so it would not surprise me with that young girl in a couple of years if her ACL just blows. It's a worrying trend. So you youngsters and you guys who are coaching the youngsters, make sure they're doing all this stuff. And you can't, like we can't do it with our pathways in the academy all the time. When schools take precedent and they're saying some of them pay the 35 grand fees or whatever, and they want to take the kids and play them how many games a week. But just try, if that's, remember the glass analogy, if it's 50% for the training, 50% for the bowling, then it goes up and down. Exactly the same thing. If suddenly all the bowling workloads and all the games are up there, then let's take the training down. Let's just look after them. Soft tissue, like we said, the primals, correctives. Forget about the stuff that's going to drain the CNS system, like your lifting. Forget that, because their body's already going to be shattered, and in cortisol levels and all sorts of things are going to be all over the shop. But just make sure that they're going about things in the right way and not getting absolutely caned. So let's forget about the kids for the moment, and let's talk about the pros. Stress fractures are one. What's the other, or a couple of the big things we see with the pros that we have to try and keep on top of?
Size strain. We get plenty of size strains, don't we? Or you get some rib impingement that we get with young players as well. Obviously, we've done pretty well with shoulder injuries the last few years. I know people automatically think cricket, you're going to get loads of shoulder injuries. I actually think we haven't had a serious shoulder injury for probably 2 or 3 years now. Touch wood. I think, again, workload is key. You know, you just talked about your glass analogy there. You can break that down for different joints as well. If you consistently throw at a decent level over a prolonged period of time, your shoulder gets used to that level of throwing. If you underpin that with good rotate to cuff strength, good mobility through thoracic spine, stable through your traps and your neck, you're limiting things that can go wrong with that shoulder. So I think, that's a bit of a myth that cricketers just get shoulder injuries. So I think we've probably gone quite well with that, to be honest.
And we look through, if anyone does complain of elbow or shoulder pain, we work very much as a pair where we go and sort of go through everything with them. So shoulder pain, we're never thinking, right, unless they've been hit or landed on it, we're never thinking that's the issue. We look in and around the area, particularly thoracic. We see so many, well, not now because, we've worked so much on it, but, when we first started diving into it, we were seeing how blocked the thoracic was. The rib cage wasn't working. And then you look at how the scapula goes on the rib cage and everything like that. and you just literally trace it back to find the point of origin. And we've managed to eradicate pretty much shoulder injuries. We've managed to eradicate hamstring injuries, quad injuries.
Yeah, we've done well with lower limb muscle tears. I think probably the other common one that we see a lot of is a posterior impingement in the ankle.
Yeah.
Which is a really, really common injury in bowlers. The one thing I would say is if people get them, it's not just a case of just strap it and manage it for 6 months. Actually, do everything around that joint and around the area to maintain the movement you've got, the strength you've got in the area.
Yeah.
And actually, you'll probably find if you get a week off in the season somewhere, your symptoms might settle enough that you become fairly pain-free.
Yeah.
As opposed to just strap and play with pain for 6 months. I actually really strongly disagree with that. And you do see it happen.
Be proactive. We had a guy, one of our youngsters went to under-19s. He rolled his ankle and had a bit of pain after that. And his dorsiflexion, the knee-to-wall test went down to, was it 3?
3.
And all they did to manage it was strap it up. So he came back to us and they'd done nothing. So within 2 days, they've been working on him, manual therapy, and some of the other exercises, and got them up to 9 centimeters from the wall. And we talk about that whole chain. If the ankle's locked down, you're gonna get problems up the chain.
Yeah.
So if it's, they haven't gone for it and get that ankle working, we're talking knee, we're talking hips, we're talking lower back, are all going to be put at risk. And we don't need the lower back put at more risk by something stupid like that, when there's already so many other factors we're firefighting against all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got so many programs here for knees, ankles, hips, everything. If you do get something, don't just rest. Like David says, strap it. Or one of the worst things we see is these massive ankle braces that are just locking the ankle down. If the ankle can move and go through its full mobility, like we talk about, it's going to go up to the knee. The knee doesn't want to move. But if you're forcing it to move, then we see cartilage injuries. And we talk about, people say, it's unlucky if you get cartilage injury. Well, it's not if you've locked either the hip or the ankle, because something's going to give, and it's going to be that. So let's give the guys in a few little tips for how they can almost self-manage, whether it be an ankle or back.
So self-manage for, say, if someone got an ankle injury in the season. So I think the first thing would be a knee-to-wall test for someone is quite actually simple to measure. So, the average healthy ankle, you'd probably get 12 centimetres knee-to-wall, which I don't know if you've taken them through knee-to-wall stuff before.
Yeah. So remember last year, we showed you the whole process of all the tests we do with the pros through the season. So I'll tag that video, but have a little look at that, because that's the knee-to-wall dorsiflexion test.
So if you get an ankle injury, obviously the one thing you want to make sure it's not unstable. So make sure you can single leg hop and do things like that. If you can single leg hop and you've got pain posterior part of the ankle, non-dominant side, if you're a fast bowler, it's highly likely you've probably got something like a posterior impingement. The only things you could be there is an FHL tenosynovitis, so you can do things like pushing against your big toe to see if you've got any pain at the back of the ankle as well. But I think the main thing with any ankle injury, if you haven't got swelling and you've just got some localised pain in the back, it's probably going to be an impingement.
Right, okay.
So the first thing you have to do to get on top of it is maintain your dorsiflexion, your knee to wall. So you need to maintain that at 10 plus. If you're normally at a 12, and 12 is probably a fairly healthy ankle, have to maintain above 10. Strapping helps, but strapping is just allowing you to continue your bowling workloads.
Yeah.
You need to get back on top of it. You need to maintain calf and soleus strength and maintain your range. That's the one big thing I'd say for an ankle.
Sweet.
Maintain.
Perfect. And how about back?
So back's obviously, it's fairly difficult because it's hard to self-diagnose if you've got something wrong with your back.
But so just remember, we did a quick video with Dave before Christmas about how you can do something called the stalk test to see if you have the symptoms. Not saying you definitely will have the injury, but if you've got the symptoms related to a stress fracture, how you can do the test yourself or on a player you work with, and then refer up the line. So yeah.
So obviously, if you do something like a stalk test and you think you've got pain, and then you think I need to manage this, get a diagnosis first, but don't go and pay a physio £40 a session for 8 weeks for them just to have you in and just rub your back for 20 minutes. That's something that's a complete waste of money. Offload it until you're pain free. Get that area of your body pain free again, and then just start to graduate things back into rehab. So start to load your glutes a little bit again. Start to do some basic trunk work on the floor that you can start to activate those abdominals and things again in that area of your trunk. And then just graduate yourself back into everything. If you get a diagnosis of a stress fracture and they say, look, this is probably going to take 6 months to heal, block that into little sections. I'm sure you probably talk about programming and how to block things into sections. Yeah. Use those sections and just graduate yourself nicely back into having a really strong trunk and being really stable around the area with good mobility above and below. That's the basics really that I try and get on top of.
Perfect. So that's the guys you hear, the things you guys hear about all the time. Okay. Right, we'll leave it there. We've taken up enough of your time. But Davo, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Hopefully you got something good out of it. Any questions, fire them over, and I'll catch you soon.